Her heartbeat counted the moments. Her breath came slow, warming winter air as it left her chest. Coffee hung sweet in the concourse. Fluorescent light flattened everything except the quiet tremor in her hands. The scanner's chirp felt like a verdict each time it sounded for someone else. She asked herself, not for the first time, why us? The answer was older than the airport and colder than the jet bridge. Bias, wearing a badge of procedure. She steadied the notebook. Names, times, witnesses, and felt a turn inside, a hinge from ache to resolve. If power would not look up, proof would make it. If a system would not listen, a record would speak. This was the moment her calm hardened into purpose. This is not only our story. It is a test of justice. The story does not stop here. Our lead will soon face an even greater challenge. If this moved you, comment with one word, justice, and consider liking and following so more people hear it. The morning crowd at O'Hare moved like a slow current under soft holiday music, jackets zipped to the chin, the smell of coffee drifting from a stand near the windows. Snow dusted the drop-off lanes outside, and inside Terminal 3, Concourse K glowed with bright white light that polished every word into something official. Ava Brooks stood with her sister Maya at the check-in counter, their winter scarves tucked away and their tickets ready. They had packed lightly. 2 carry-ons and a shared determination that travel could be orderly if everyone did what was promised. Ava believed in the comfort of policies written down, in the small peace of being treated as the rules explained. She kept her voice even and her smile careful as the counter agent, a man whose name tag read Colin Harper, scanned their IDs and typed with quiet speed. The printer chattered. 2 boarding passes slid out, crisp and warm against the counter. The first words Ava saw were not first class, but main cabin. The second pass matched the first. For a breath, she thought it was only a stray glitch, a harmless typo like a street sign tilted by wind. She asked softly if there had been a mix-up. And Colin answered with the practiced cadence of someone who spoke for a system rather than for himself. There had been recent changes, he said, and the rules on upgrades had tightened. He spoke without looking up, his fingers still moving. The way he paused before the word rules felt like a small door closing. Maya leaned closer. "We purchased first class," she said, steady and clear, and asked for the record to be pulled if needed. She kept her tone warm enough for the people in line to relax and firm enough that her words did not blur. Maya had a habit of writing things down when friction appeared, a habit learned from trips where a spoken promise vanished by the time they reached the gate. She opened a small notebook and recorded the time in words, the counter number, and the agent's name. The woman behind them shifted her tote and offered a sympathetic half-smile. The man 2 places back cleared his throat and studied the ceiling as if the tiles might have policy stamped on them. Colin frowned lightly, as though troubled by weather rather than people. "This can be handled at the gate," he said. His voice was careful, almost gentle, as if he were offering a blanket instead of a postponement. Ava asked to see the fare class attached to the reservation. He said the system was busy and that he would place a flag for the gate team. He printed the passes again. They still read main cabin. The paper curled at the corner like a leaf drying on a windowsill. Maya wrote the second time, and the phrase "gate will handle." It was a phrase she had heard in many American service lines, a phrase that meant someone else would own the discomfort. Ava weighed how far to press. Her judgment, practiced by years of gently insisting on what was fair, told her not to raise her voice. She explained, with patience, that the purchase confirmation and the receipt, both sent by email, clearly showed first class, and that if the cabin was oversold, they would accept a transparent explanation and a documented solution. The agent nodded, stayed vague, and gestured to the side so the line could move. It was the kind of gesture that looked polite in a photograph. A security officer strolled by with the unhurried rhythm of a person whose work, by definition, arrived as a surprise. He did not make eye contact. In the bright spill of the concourse, Ava felt the ordinary world tilt just a degree, the way a picture frame hangs a little crooked without falling. They stepped away, passing the coffee stand where a barista offered samples and a handwritten sign wished travelers a peaceful season. Maya suggested they email themselves a quick summary while the memory was fresh. She dictated softly. The agent's name, the time, the exact words about rules tightening, and gate will handle. A small foreshadow threaded through her sentence as she repeated the print line that had pushed itself onto both passes. The phrase looked harmless on paper and heavy in the hand. They made a brief detour to a row of seats where a family tried to split a bagel politely. Ava watched the little choreography of American courtesy. The father saying, "Please take the larger half," the mother insisting no, and the child shrugging in a way that meant the adults would decide politely for too long. The scene made her smile despite the knot in her stomach. She needed her head clear. The day was cold. The terminal was bright. She would not let a misprint in ink rewrite what had been promised. Around them, announcements drifted like steady rain. Reminders about unattended baggage, about keeping the line moving, about respect and patience as travel volumes rose. They returned to the counter once, not to dispute, but to request a quick confirmation that the flag for the gate had been applied. Colin glanced at his screen and nodded. "It's on there," he said. The nod was small, like a stone dropped into deep water. Ava thanked him, and he returned to his keyboard. The man 2 places back was now at the front, asking how long it would take to reprint his own pass. Colin told him it would take a moment. The printer made the same indifferent sound. Paper came out. People moved. The system exercised its quiet, everyday might. Ava and Maya walked towards security, their carry-ons rolling in a neat sync. Terminal 3 felt like a neighborhood without houses. The same faces crossed the same corners again and again. They passed a holiday display where a child pressed his nose to a model train circling a tiny snow village. An older couple shared a bench and held hands beneath a folded newspaper. Maya noted the checkpoint line label, the lane number printed on a hanging sign, the subtle shift of the queue ropes that arranged travelers into the shape of patient compliance. She had learned over time that details saved you from being told your memory was faulty. At the far end of the counter area, a supervisor stood with a tablet and scanned the line like a ship's officer scanning the horizon. The supervisor's gaze moved past Ava and Maya, then returned in a brief double-take that did not break into recognition. It had the coolness of someone policing a standard that could not be spoken out loud. Ava felt the small sting and recognized it for what it was. Not a fire, not a blow, but the repetition of a doubt about who belonged where. She refused, inwardly, to stop belonging. She folded the 2 passes, slid them into the side pocket of her coat, and suggested they move on. They still had time to reach the checkpoint before the midday wave washed through. As they joined the flow, the faint smell of cinnamon and floor cleaner rode the air. A gate agent at a nearby podium laughed at a joke from a colleague and then grew serious, her eyes returning to the screen. The digital boards cycled city names in a soft march of destinations. Somewhere on those boards, their flight waited with a tidy row of letters and a promised arrival time. Ava imagined the boarding door opening exactly when it should, their seats waiting exactly where the diagram had promised, the armrests the way they had looked in the purchase confirmation. She allowed herself that optimism because, in her understanding of fairness, hope could be an act of responsibility. The family with the bagel crossed behind them, moving toward another concourse. The father nodded good luck as if the word had weight, and Ava returned the nod with a smile meant to be twice as strong as she felt. Maya tucked the notebook away, ready to present it again when called to do so. She did not prefer to make a scene. She preferred to build a record so scenes would not be necessary. The walkway hummed. The season hummed with it. The kindness of strangers and the chill of strangers braided together the way winter winds can braid warmth into scarves. At the automatic doors to security, a small draft lifted the corner of Ava's boarding pass within her coat, as if the paper wanted to be seen. She pressed it flat with her palm. She could feel the word that should not be there. That quiet main cabin pressed against her through cloth. She spared a glance back at the counter. Colin had a new passenger now, a woman in a red sweater who smiled the way people smile when they believe the rules will be their friend. Ava let the glance go. She had Maya. She had the confirmation in her email. She had the way the truth tends to glow, even in fluorescent light. What she could not know yet was how the word Maine would ripple ahead of them like a pebble thrown into a lake, how the surface would look perfectly calm until the ripples reached the gate. For now, there was only the next step, the next line, the next polite exchange. A voice on the public address system cleared its throat in a familiar chime. People around them reached for bags and for patience. Somewhere, a child said he could see his breath when the doors sliding open let a thin ribbon of cold inside. Ava squeezed Maya's hand once, a small oath that they would keep calm and keep going. The economy boarding pass sat awkward in Ava's hand, like a silent accusation. The airport chime sounded. Enhanced security screening at the TSA checkpoint. The line for security at O'Hare curved and doubled back under bright light, the kind of clean glow that makes everything look official and non-negotiable. Announcements moved across the air at measured intervals, asking travelers to place laptops in separate bins, to empty pockets, to remove coats and shoes. A transportation officer lifted a hand and redirected people toward new stanchions as another lane opened. Ava and Maya joined the slow shuffle that marks the season, their scarves tucked into their coats, each hand on the handle of a carry-on. The memory of the counter followed them like a faint echo. The boarding passes printed in the wrong cabin, the soft sentence about rules tightening, the promise that the gate would handle it. Maya had written it all down. She kept the small notebook zipped in her purse, ready in case a detail later tried to pretend it had not happened. They reached the section where an officer checked identification against faces. The officer's voice was calm and pleasant. The practiced warmth of someone who says good morning to hundreds of strangers in one shift. The officer drew a discreet mark on Ava's ticket sleeve, then another on Maya's. It could have been the harmless shorthand of a system staying organized. It could have been a flag. A second officer gestured them toward a lane under a sign that read "Screening Area" in letters big enough to stop questions. Ava thanked the officer out of habit and moved forward. Maya glanced back long enough to see a woman in a red sweater and a man in a baseball cap glide toward a different lane with no extra mark on their sleeves. The belt moved. Plastic trays clacked like a light percussion section as people nested shoes, laptops, and toiletry bags into neat rectangles. Ava placed her coat, scarf, and laptop in separate bins, then set her carry-on on the belt. She had done this dance more times than she could count and preferred to think of it as choreography rather than ordeal. A supervisor in a dark blazer with a name tag that read Tanya Carter stepped up to the end of the rollers. Her tone was steady and practiced. "Secondary screening," Tanya said to Ava. Then, after a very short pause, to Maya as well. "Please step to the side." Ava met her gaze. "Of course," she said, keeping the timbre of her voice even. "What do you need us to do?" "Additional pat-down and a hair check," Tanya replied, glancing at her tablet. "Also a hand swab." Ava nodded. "All right. I'm comfortable with a female officer performing the pat-down. For the hair, would you please explain the method you plan to use?" "It is standard," Tanya said. "Random selection." Maya kept her expression neutral and raised her notebook. "Could you tell us the lane name and your role so I can note it correctly?" Her tone was gentle, the way a librarian might ask for a card to be returned on time. "Lane Delta," Tanya said. "Supervisor." Maya wrote the letters and the word supervisor in careful strokes. She recorded the time in words, not out of superstition, but because later, when systems are queried, words have a way of keeping their shape. 2 passengers behind them, a grandmotherly woman with a silver bob and a man with a travel pillow around his neck, watched with soft concern. The woman offered a whisper of support. "If you need someone to say we saw you follow every instruction, we are happy to help," she said. Her voice carried the matter-of-fact kindness of someone who had lived long enough to know small offers can be a big relief. "Thank you," Ava said. "We appreciate that." They stepped into a smaller area marked by a waist-high barrier. A female officer approached with blue gloves and a professional calm. She explained each step of the pat-down before performing it, asking permission as required. Ava thanked her after each step, not out of obligation, but because the officer's clear language kept the moment from turning into something it did not need to be. When it came time for the hair check, Tanya moved closer. "I will need to inspect your hair," Tanya said. Ava's hair was styled in a protective pattern that took time and care, a design that kept its shape without inviting hands. She asked, in a voice as even as she could manage, "Would you please use the back of your gloved hand and avoid pulling? If a visual inspection accomplishes the same objective, I would prefer that." "It is standard," Tanya repeated, as if the word were a key that opened any locked door. "Random." Maya noted the exact phrase. She wrote random selection. Hair check requested. Traveller asked for minimal contact. She also wrote the names of the 2 nearby passengers who had offered help. She did not record a video. She knew the rules about sensitive areas and had no interest in giving anyone an easy reason to ignore the substance in favor of the surface. The female officer, not Tanya, conducted the hair check with care, using the back of a gloved hand and moving with the kind of slow attention that says a person understands the difference between procedure and provocation. When she finished, she said, "All set," and offered a small nod. The hand swab came next, followed by a wait of half a minute that felt twice as long. The machine beeped, the officer glanced at the screen, and the swab went into a bin for items that had nothing to report. Ava exhaled without making a sound. The female officer gestured toward the belt. "You can collect your belongings," she said. "Thank you for your patience." Maya thanked her and added a quiet, "We appreciate the explanation." The officer's eyes softened, and she moved on to the next traveller. Tanya remained. "Please do not record in this area," she said, though no recording device was visible. "Understood," Maya answered. "We are keeping notes. If we need to follow up, we will use the channel your agency provides." Tanya's face showed nothing. She turned and walked 3 steps to speak with another officer, her voice low. Ava and Maya returned to the rollers to reclaim their things. The trays clacked again, a sound that suddenly seemed louder than it had a moment before. Ava slipped back into her coat, placed the laptop in her bag, and laced her shoes with neat loops. Maya zipped the notebook into her purse and checked that the boarding passes were still tucked into Ava's pocket. The low hum of the station filled in around them. The grandmotherly witness and the man with the travel pillow waited near the benches. "Would you like us to write our names?" the woman asked. "We can confirm that you did everything by the book." "That is very kind," Ava said. "If you would not mind, a first name and a phone number would help if someone asks what occurred here." The woman offered her name and a number, speaking in a steady rhythm, and the man did the same. They did not ask for details. They did not ask for drama. They simply acted like neighbors in a shared space, which is a quiet American art. They moved out of the screening area and into the general flow, where families repacked strollers and business travelers rethreaded belts through loops with a speed learned by repetition. Ava's eyes tracked the overhead signs toward the concourse, then down to the clock face near the ceiling with its long second hand proceeding at an indifferent pace. She did not measure the day in minutes now. She measured it in thresholds. One had been the counter. One had been the lane marked Delta, and the word random hung on it like a coat hook. They stopped for a moment near a water fountain. A child filled a bottle while a parent murmured reminders about saying thank you to the person holding the door. A pair of airline crew walked by with rolling suitcases, their uniforms crisp, their smiles brief and professional. Maya took out the notebook and read the last few lines, scanning for holes. She had written the time in words, the lane name, the supervisor's title, the specific requests and responses. The page made a small rectangle of order in a morning that had not offered much. "What do you think happens at the gate?" Maya asked, not to predict, but to prepare. "I think we keep our voices calm and our facts straight," Ava said. "We answer questions. We ask for a clear explanation, in writing if needed. We do not let anyone make us the story. We return to the story already written, what was bought, what was promised." Maya nodded. "And we keep the witnesses in mind," she said. "People are kind. Sometimes they simply need to be invited to stand where the light is." They crossed to the moving walkway. The rubber handrail moved under their palms like a slow, reliable river. Conversation rose and fell around them. A teenager describing a concert in a city 2 time zones away, a grandmother asking whether a plant could survive in a checked bag, a man recounting a ball game from the previous night in the measured tones of someone who uses scores to talk about everything that is not sport. The ordinary chorus of travel steadied them. Near the end of the walkway, a uniformed officer flagged a couple for a bag check and apologized for the inconvenience with a tone that sounded as if he meant it. Ava took note of how reassurance, when delivered with clarity and respect, could turn the edge of a moment. She remembered the phrase "gate will handle" and decided, with a small inward nod, that at the gate she would ask for names and for the specific policy citation. Calm, clear, and documented. She could manage that. She had managed more difficult things than this. They passed a window where snow flurries feathered the view of the tarmac. Baggage carts made their careful crossings. A plane taxied in with lights blinking like steady beacons. If the morning had a headline, it was not chaos. It was friction. It was the repetition of small decisions that lean in one direction. Ava lived in a country where people taught children to say please and thank you, and where strangers held doors during the holidays. She refused to believe that the better habit could not prevail. As they approached the end of the security zone, A young officer greeted them with a cheerful nod that did not feel forced. "Have a good flight," he said. "Thank you," Ava replied, meaning it. The concourse widened. A coffee kiosk sent out a warm smell of cinnamon and fresh brew. A newsstand displayed headlines about winter storms out west and about a city council somewhere debating public transportation routes. Life everywhere, Ava thought, coming and going, deciding and revising. Maya slowed near a directory screen and confirmed the arrow toward their gate. The screen also listed a handful of eateries they might pass before boarding. One name she recognized, and the familiarity brought a little relief. A sit-down place could offer the reset that people sometimes need after a morning of small, hard edges. Before they moved on, Maya glanced down at her phone to add one more annotation to her notes. The device buzzed in her hand. She looked at the message and felt the tiniest drop in her stomach. Not fear, not panic, just the shift that occurs when a plan acquires an extra step. It was a delay notice, the kind that speaks in a polite voice, while still asking patience from people who have already spent a morning practicing it. She looked up and saw, ahead of them and to the right, the overhead sign hanging like a small invitation toward rest and a bite. Maya's phone buzzed with a notice of a brief delay. Ahead, the overhead sign pointed toward Publican Tavern. Publican Tavern sat just off the concourse like a warm pocket in winter, the kind of place where copper light made the edges of a day feel round again. A chalkboard listed soups and pies in tidy hand lettering, and the smell of butter and coffee felt almost like a promise. The delay notice on Maya's phone had bought them a small window. They stepped through the doorway and paused the way travelers do when they are ready to accept ordinary kindness. Ava glanced at the open tables by the window, glass polished, silverware waiting in wrapped napkins. Maya gave her a faint nod. After the wrong cabin on the passes and the extra inspection at security, they wanted a chair, a bowl of something hot, and the decency of being seated in the order they had arrived. At the host stand, a young woman smiled with the default cheer of crowded places. Her name tag read Lauren. The smile did not quite land. "Welcome," she said. "We are currently full." Ava looked at the tables near the window, then back to Lauren. "We can wait," she said, gentle and clear. "May we put our name down?" Lauren's fingers hovered over the screen in front of her, then fell still. "There is a hold on tables due to peak hour," she said. "We are not seating walk-ins at the moment." Maya kept her voice even. "We are happy to wait." "Could you please tell us the current wait time? Or, if there is a list, may we add our names?" She offered the kind of soft smile people use when they are trying to make a moment easier for the person on the other side of the counter. Lauren's eyes skated past them toward the hallway, as if a busier problem were arriving. "We have policies during high traffic," she said. "Management is reviewing them today." Ava let the sentence settle. She placed her palm on the edge of the host stand, the way someone steadies a book before turning the page. "We are on the concourse because our flight has a small delay," she said. "We would appreciate a table when available. If the list is closed, may we ask when it will reopen?" Lauren's smile tightened into something careful. "Let me check with my manager," she said, and disappeared behind the partition. Maya and Ava waited near the display of pies. A family of 4 stepped in, then rotated back out toward a grab-and-go line with patient resignation. At a corner table, a pair of airline employees split a salad and spoke in the shorthand of people who work on clocks measured in pushbacks and gate turns. A server passed with a tray and said, "Excuse me," in a tone that was neither rushed nor unkind. The restaurant felt like a small exercise in American neighborliness. Please and thank you woven into the weave, a place where a tip line on the check would later ask for a share of gratitude, usually somewhere between 18 and 20%. The manager arrived with the air of a man trained to keep a space moving. His name tag read Scott. "How can I help?" he asked. Ava explained, briefly and without edge, that they had just asked to be put on a wait list. She gestured to the window tables, still set and empty. "We are aware it is a busy time," she added. "We are fine to wait." Scott nodded, as if considering a mechanical puzzle that had only one answer. "We are currently at capacity," he said. "Those tables are held for larger parties. Also, due to traffic patterns, we are not taking additional walk-ins." Maya tried a different door. "Would it be possible to write down our names and the time we asked? If you reopen, it will help everyone here to seat in a fair order." Scott's lips formed a sympathetic shape that did not alter the line of his jaw. "We do not disclose or share the wait list," he said. "If you would like to stay in the hallway, you may, but please do not block the entrance. If you have concerns, you are welcome to contact customer relations." Ava kept her tone mild. "We are not looking to block anything," she said. "We are only asking for the same process you extend to others." Scott's gaze moved over their coats, their carry-ons, their faces, and then past them to the doorway, where two men in business jackets were approaching. "Gentlemen," he called out, brightening, "we can seat you at the bar while you wait for a high top." He stepped aside and gestured them in. Maya watched the men pass. She was not interested in creating a scene that could be shrugged off as a misunderstanding later. She was interested in a record that could be understood at a glance. "Would you share your last name for our notes?" she asked Scott, voice as warm as a coat sleeve. "Manager Scott Kramer," he said, and then with a softer edge, "Please do not raise your voice or obstruct the entrance, or we will have to involve security." Ava blinked once. "We are speaking calmly," she said. "We will step aside so others can pass." "Thank you for confirming your role." Scott inclined his head the way people do when they want a conversation to step off the stage. He turned to greet a party of three. "Right this way," he said, motioning them toward the bar. It would have been easy to let frustration bubble up and spill over, to use the sharpness that sometimes wins small victories and always costs something larger. Ava slid back from the stand and took a breath the way one learns to do during winter. In through the nose, out through the mouth, slow enough to warm the air. She turned to Maya. "Perhaps we find a quick bite elsewhere," she said. "We need to keep the day within our reach." A server had been watching from the corner of the dining room, a woman with steady hands and eyes that met Ava's without flinching. She approached without the theatre of rescue. "I am very sorry for your experience," she said, in a voice pitched to be heard and not overheard. "I am Isabel. I cannot seat you if the host stand has closed the floor, but I can do this." She pulled a small card from her apron, the kind printed with the restaurant's name and a blank space for notes, and wrote in a clear, neat hand, "Voucher for inconvenience." She added the date in words, her first name, and a simple apology. Ava accepted the card. The paper felt like a firm handshake. "Thank you," she said. "This is thoughtful." Isabel nodded. "If anyone needs to confirm what happened," she said, "I am willing to speak." "The front will have the schedule to reach me." She glanced at the manager's back, then back at them. "I am sorry," she added again, not as a formula but as something chosen. Maya found her own good manners intact. "We appreciate you," she said, "and we will note your name. May we also note your role?" "Server," Isabel said. "Afternoon shift." A couple at the nearest table caught Isabel's eye and lifted their hands for a check. She gave Ava a quick professional smile and returned to her tables. Ava slid the voucher into the side pocket of her coat alongside the boarding passes that still read a cabin they had not purchased. The pocket felt heavier now, but not in a way that pulled her down. It felt like a place where the day could live in order. They stepped back onto the concourse. A cart rolled past with hot pretzels. People in festive sweaters moved like a single patient animal, stopping to form lines without being told. A man held a door while 3 people thanked him one after another, each in a slightly different cadence. The concourse at holiday time is a study in small courtesies and small frictions, the way a zipper both closes and snags. Maya touched the edge of the voucher through Ava's coat and then let her hand fall. "We will keep this with the rest," she said. "If later someone asks for proof of how the day went, this is part of the picture." Ava agreed. "We will not argue when a record will do," she said. "We will ask for names, write down times in words, and keep the temperature low." They walked toward the corridor that led to their gate. Speakers offered an instrumental carol that had played in every mall food court since before either of them could remember. The notes carried a little farther across tile and glass, like a streetlight in mist. Maya liked the way the song tolerated all the different moods under the roof. She had learned that music in public places did not ask you to be happy. It only kept the air from echoing when a hard sentence fell. They passed a coffee kiosk and a newsstand stacked with magazines about cooking, politics, and home repairs. At the corner of the kiosk, a small sign suggested tipping for baristas who pulled extra shots and perfected foam hearts. It made her think of Isabel again, of the grace in handing over a card and a name when it would have been easier to look away. She would send a note later, not only to a complaint address, but to a commendation one as well. She believed in writing both kinds of letters. The hallway narrowed toward the cluster of gates on their concourse. Ava slowed for a moment to check the overhead monitors that rolled through lists of cities. Their destination stood chalk steady in its column, promising arrival by early evening. She adjusted her scarf and then laughed softly at herself. "I am not cold," she said. "I am bracing." Maya smiled. "It has been a morning designed to make people brace," she said. "We have handled it." In the last stretch before the gate, traffic thickened. A family negotiated a stroller, 3 backpacks, and a patient toddler whose shoes lit up in blue with each step. A man in a sports jacket argued into a phone about a hotel voucher in a different city, dropping his voice when he realized he was louder than he meant to be. 2 college students compared playlists and decided they had each only been pretending to like the same band. The public life of travel dangled everywhere, the small theatre of people trying and failing and trying again to be their better selves in view of strangers. Ava pointed with her chin. Ahead, the familiar podium stood at their gate, the kind of simple piece of furniture that could decide whether a day made sense. The walkway to the jet bridge was empty. The scanner sat idle. No line had formed yet, but a handful of people occupied the nearest seats with the early look of people who like to be early for everything. "Before we speak to the gate," Maya said, "let us decide how to start. Facts first. Our confirmation, the fare class, the incorrect printing, the flag at the counter, the lane at security, the voucher from Isabel. Then requests, seats honored as purchased, written documentation if not." "And names?" Ava said. "We will ask for names. We will treat them as we want to be treated. Even if the policy does not treat us that way, it is our anchor." They paused near a wide window that gave them a slice of apron and sky. A baggage tractor hummed by in steady duty. A ground crew member raised 2 batons and rotated his wrists, a small dance of guidance that kept big machines in graceful arcs. Maya watched the movement and thought again about choreography. How much order a day could have if everyone did their part. How much chaos if one person pretended a step did not apply to them. They turned toward the seating area. Under the gate sign, a rolling monitor cycled messages, as neutral as a shrug. A woman in a bright scarf told a friend over the phone that she would bring pie if her connection held. A man asked a flight attendant if the cabin had space for a musical instrument and received a courteous answer with details about overhead bins and alternate arrangements. The world is full of policies, Maya thought, and the people who interpret them, for good or ill. Ava looked down at the pocket where the voucher sat. She did not need to hold it to feel its shape. It calmed her. It told her the morning had edges someone else could see. Whatever came at the gate, the day would have this. A small square of paper from a person who had chosen to care, signed in ink that had tried to be warm in a fluorescent room. The boarding chime for gate K12 sounded, announcing early boarding. Ava tightened her grip on the voucher in her hand. If the gate also says there is no room, what will they have left to hold on to? The concourse around gate K12 hummed with the quiet urgency of a holiday afternoon. Overhead boards cycled through city names while the podium display refreshed in a calm blue loop. A thin ribbon of cold slipped through each time the automatic doors opened toward the jet bridge, and the smell of coffee drifted from a kiosk 2 turns back. People clustered by habit into invisible categories. Those who study the boarding hierarchy like a hymn, those who claim seats near the podium to read the agent's expressions, those who hover with one foot pointing toward the aisle, as if readiness could move a line faster. Ava and Maya arrived with their carry-ons rolling in unison, and the soft resolve of people who have decided to keep all their edges round. The early chime had announced that pre-boarding would begin soon, and the small screen to the right of the podium already listed the order. Passengers needing assistance, active service members, first class, and then numbered groups. They approached the counter with the patience that keeps public spaces humane. The gate agent's name tag read Peter Lawson. He had the careful, unreadable calm of someone who can turn a procedure into a shield. Ava offered their boarding passes and a warm greeting, the kind that settles a conversation on the right footing. Peter scanned the first pass and frowned. He scanned the second and frowned in the exact same way. "The system shows main cabin," he said, voice neutral, eyes back on the screen. "You may need to wait while we sort it out." Ava kept her tone even. "Our purchase confirmation shows first class for both passengers," she said. "The counter placed a flag to alert the gate of a printing error. Could you please check the reservation details and the fare class?" Peter nodded in a way that did not quite mean yes. "There are times when inventory changes," he said. "We can offer you seats in the main cabin or rebook you on a later flight." Maya opened her notebook the way a person opens an umbrella when the sky decides. "May we have your name for our notes and the name of your supervisor?" she asked, gentle, steady. "Also, could you let us know which policy applies to this situation so we can quote it accurately?" "Peter Lawson," he said. "My supervisor is Janet O'Neill." He paused a moment that felt like a held breath and added, "She is on her way." Ava laid the printed confirmation on the counter, the email on her phone with the purchased fare displayed in letters large enough to read at a glance. "We understand if a mistake needs to be corrected," she said. "We are simply asking that the correction match what was promised." The boarding chime sounded softly, and the screen shifted to list the first category. A couple at the far left rose with walking canes and made their way to the lane, assisted by a flight attendant who used short, clear sentences and a real smile. A man in uniform stood up near the first row of seats and waited without moving forward until the agent lifted his hand. The choreography looked like common sense wearing a suit. Janet arrived with the brisk stride of a person accustomed to putting fires out with a binder. "How can I help?" she asked. Ava explained in a few sentences what had happened at the counter and at security, then summarized the present issue. "We simply want to take our seats as purchased," she said. "If there is an overbooking or a substitution, we request the policy in writing and an immediate, transparent solution." Janet's expression arranged itself into professional concern. "We are in a peak period," she said, words measured. "The system is reflecting main cabin for both passengers. You are welcome to accept those seats and board with your group, or we can rebook you." Maya mentioned the flag at the counter and the voucher from the restaurant briefly as part of a picture that needed to be whole. "We also have names of witnesses at the security lane," she added, not as a threat, but as a simple sentence with edges smoothed. "We are keeping a record so we can follow up appropriately." Janet glanced at Peter's screen and made a note on her tablet. "Please wait to the side," she said. "We will continue processing boarding while we work on this. It is the most efficient way to prevent delays for all passengers." Ava moved aside as asked, not because the words were fair, but because the posture was. She and Maya stepped to a position near the retractable belt, where they were visible and out of the way at once. The first-class line began to form. A family with a small child, a woman with a violin case, an older couple in matching sweaters, and two business travelers clustered with the habitual stillness of people who travel often. The scanner chirped with a sound that meant yes. The printer near the podium spat out a thin slip here and there, with the same indifference as the machines at the counter. Ava caught Maya's eye. The impulse to rush the podium rose and fell like a wave held in a palm. "Facts and tone," Ava said, mostly to steady herself. "We keep both." "Names and time," Maya answered, and wrote down the minute in words, then noted that first-class boarding had begun while their issue remained unaddressed. When there was a gap between boarding sets, Ava stepped to the counter again. "If the system is misclassifying," she said to Janet, "may we request a manual override or an alternate aircraft configuration that honors the purchased seats? If neither is possible, may we have a written statement for a passenger relations file?" Janet kept her voice smooth. "Please step back, ma'am," she said in a tone trained to feel calm to everyone else in earshot. "We are handling it." The screen shifted again. "Now boarding first class," it read in letters the color of a traffic sign on a clear day. The agent lifted his hand to invite the waiting line forward. Ava and Maya moved with them, not in a surge, not in a scene, but in a steady step meant to match the procedure they had been told to trust. Peter raised his palm toward them alone. "Please wait," he said. "Your boarding is not cleared." A passenger 2 rows back frowned and whispered they were in line, to no one in particular. Another shook his head and looked back at his phone, letting the shrug do the work of his conscience. The small public square of a gate area has its own physics. Attention gathers where a process stalls. Peter gestured towards the retractable belt and unclipped it with the motion of a traffic officer. The belt swung and formed a narrow lane to the side of the scanner. "Stand here," he said, voice clipped. The word here was not a place. It was a sorting. A flight attendant at the door to the jet bridge glanced over, registered the shape of a situation, and looked down again at a manifest. Behind her, a ground agent named Mark DeLuca stood as a human hinge between soft carpet and hard metal. He stepped forward when he saw Ava and Maya approach, not with force, but with the firm presence of someone meant to enforce a boundary. "The boarding system shows a hold," he said. "Please remain outside the bridge," Ava answered, with the soft gravity that keeps a moment from breaking. "We are asking for what we purchased," she said. "If there is a hold, we ask for a supervisor and for the policy that supports it." Janet arrived on their left, tablet in hand, eyes on the growing line. "We cannot block the aisle," she said. "Please move to the side so boarding can continue." Her tone tried to be gentle. It landed as command. Security arrived as if conjured by the word supervisor. Two officers, Derek Cole and Ralph Jenkins, stepped near without crowding. Their posture implied readiness. Their faces wrote an instruction in calm. Karen Doyle, who oversaw the operations desk for this side of the concourse, appeared behind them with the air of a person counting seconds. "We need to keep the area clear," she said. "If you have a concern, please take it to the side so the gate can process passengers." Maya logged each name as spoken. She did not raise her voice or her chin. She asked politely that a notation be made in the reservation that boarding had been delayed for them while first class proceeded. A man in a flannel shirt near the window said, more loudly than he realized, "They seem to be following the rules." A woman clutching a neck pillow replied, "Rules are rules," and then glanced at Ava and fell silent. Janet returned to the podium and resumed the rhythm of boarding, the scanner emitting a calm chirp as if the machine were proof that the order was correct. Ava and Maya stood in the narrow lane as group after group moved forward. The experience built itself out of small parts. The way a clipboard appeared when policy needed eyes. The way a message on a screen could remake a promise. The way people who did not know them would either stand nearer or step away as if fairness were contagious. Ava kept breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. Old winter advice for staying warm and steady. She held to the conviction that being clear and calm was not a weakness, it was a way to keep the story whole. A pause in the procession arrived, as all lines come to a gliding stop and then a start for reasons that do not always show. Ava took the moment. "Ms. O'Neill," she said, "we would like to request written documentation of any decision to deny us boarding in our purchased cabin. If the resolution requires rebooking, please include an acknowledgement of the error and the proposed remedy." Janet did not meet her eyes. "We are not denying you boarding," she said. "We are asking you to accept your seats as shown or a later flight. If you have further concerns, you can contact passenger relations." Ava let the words sit for a long breath. "We will wait right here," she said, and did not move. Mark glanced toward Karen as if to confirm that standing in a designated side lane counted as not obstructing. Karen gave a brief nod that accumulated into permission. Nearby, a child in a puffy coat watched the scanner and tried to guess when the beep would come. He was right more often than chance could explain. A grandmother murmured to her companion that travel teaches patience, and sometimes a lesson repeats until a person learns what it actually means. The lane assigned to Ava and Maya began to feel like a little island. People noticed the shape of the situation and decided in private whether it mattered to them. One man drifted closer and asked very quietly whether the two of them needed a statement from a witness. "If someone calls," Maya said with a grateful nod, "we might ask for that later." The man returned to his seat and took out a pen as if to remind himself that names, too, can be a kind of shelter. A voice on the public address system issued a gentle reminder about keeping carry-ons small enough to fit in overhead bins. The phrase went out across gates as if fairness could be automated. The boarding screen moved to the first numbered group. Ava realized that if the next 10 minutes unfolded this way, their options would shrink to unkind proportions. Accept a lesser seat or accept a longer day. She counted the choices in her head and found that none of them belonged to the person who had kept her voice soft and her facts straight since morning. Maya slid a hand into her coat pocket, not to fidget, but to confirm that the voucher from the restaurant was there, along with the boarding passes that told the wrong story. She thought about the woman at the table who had written her name and the words for inconvenience in tidy letters. The small card meant that another person had looked and seen. It steadied her. A few more passengers stepped onto the jet bridge. Mark checked the cartilage of the line, kept it from buckling. Derek and Ralph shifted just enough to remind anyone watching that the boundary was under watch. Karen checked her screen, spoke briefly into a headset, and then turned her head to listen. The flow had the feeling of a river deciding its banks. Ava studied Janet's face and knew she would not get more from the podium without a lever the podium recognized. She accepted that there are conversations one cannot complete with only grace and documentation. She allowed herself to feel the grief of that realization for exactly one breath, and then put it where she kept other hard truths. She turned to Maya, ready to ask her to try again, when Maya's phone vibrated in her pocket. The sound was small, but in the hush that arrives when a crowd pauses to listen without deciding to, it carried. Maya's phone vibrated. "He's video calling." The screen showed the name Samuel with a note. "Put it on speaker, right at the gate." The speakerphone carried Samuel's voice into the small public square of the gate, steady and unhurried, the way a storm captain reads coordinates. He asked that everyone who was directly involved identify themselves for the record, then repeated those names so the whole area could hear the spelling. Peter Lawson at the podium, Janet O'Neill supervising the gate, Mark DeLuca at the jet bridge threshold, Karen Doyle from concourse operations, and the two officers, Derek Cole and Ralph Jenkins, standing by to keep space clear. He referred briefly to the morning sequence, a cabin printed below the purchased class and a secondary screening labeled random, and said that because those events suggested a pattern rather than a single inconvenience, he would be issuing an operational pause within the narrow footprint of this gate while the facts were gathered. His voice made the pause sound smaller than panic and larger than indifference. He asked Peter to stop scanning for one cycle of boarding groups, then asked Karen to note the pause in the station log and requested that a station manager join by phone. When Michael Hines came on the line, Samuel asked him to coordinate names, times in words, and any incident numbers created by the system so far. Maya, who had turned the phone so the microphone pointed toward the podium, kept the notebook open on her palm and stood the way a person stands to keep a door from swinging shut. The concourse reacted with the kind of contained murmur that airports learn to absorb. Some passengers leaned forward, interested. Others looked down in a hurry to give their eyes the dignity of elsewhere. Janet asked, very carefully, whether the pause was truly necessary. Samuel's tone did not rise. It clarified. He said the pause would last only as long as it took to verify whether the boarding and cabin assignment could be corrected immediately or whether the company would have to repair the error by honouring the fare class on the next available departure. He added that he was also requesting a review of the morning's decisions at the counter, at the screening lane labelled Delta, and at the restaurant where a server had provided a voucher for inconvenience. He used the word pattern again, a soft word that can carry a heavy weight. Ava said nothing. She held out the printed confirmation and the email showing the fare class in letters large enough to read from a respectful distance and let the weight of paper do its quiet work. Peter checked his screen and said the system still showed main cabin. Janet suggested that the sisters accept those seats for today and file a complaint later. The crowd tightened into a listening posture. Samuel asked, still on speaker, whether a manual override was available at that station to honour the fare class, and if not, whether there was a procedure to swap equal inventory from a later flight to this one so the promise could be kept without pushing trouble forward. When Peter said no and then said it again with a longer pause, Samuel asked that Karen confirm the steps taken, and then he asked Michael to bring customer relations and operations into a quick conference so that an answer could be produced in human time rather than computer time. He never raised his voice. He kept naming what he was doing and why. He kept describing the pause as a tool rather than a threat. Somewhere behind them, a child whispered to a grandparent, "Is this about fairness?" The grandparent said yes with the kind of small nod that teaches a child which words belong to the grown-up world. A flight attendant at the doorway took a half step toward the jet bridge, then stayed in place with professional stillness. Derek and Ralph, the two officers, shifted a single pace to the left, an adjustment so mild that it could have been mistaken for comfort. Maya noticed these little calibrations, the way a carpenter notices level and plumb. She also noticed how a few passengers in first class watched her and Ava with that mix of sympathy and distance people wear when they are trying to square policy with conscience. Samuel asked Maya to read the names she had collected and the timestamps rendered in words. She did. The rhythm even. The tone friendly, as if offering a recipe. He thanked her and asked Ava to hold the phone closer to the microphone on the podium so that his next sentence would be recorded in the gate audio. That any decision for or against honoring the purchased fare class would be documented in writing with the names of the personnel involved and the policy cited, and that any rebooking would include an acknowledgement of error and the remedy offered. He finished by asking that the gate treat all passengers with patience while the pause was in place, and then asked Janet to resume boarding for those whose scans were clear while the separate channel handled the Brooks reservation. The machine chirped again for some, and not for others. The line moved in miniature tides. The sisters stood off to the side like a comma in a long sentence, holding the place where clarity would go. Janet, with the poise of someone trained to make order look natural, began to route people back into the lane, reminding those with strollers about gate checks and those with oversized items about alternate arrangements. The mood rose, then fell, then settled into the shape of a day trying to be ordinary. In that ordinariness, the pause made a kind of sense. It said, "Wait and think" at the same time. A second notification arrived, this one on Samuel's end, and the timbre of his voice shifted half a shade. He said he would be joining a board call in a few minutes, and that his presence would not remove attention from the gate. He would keep the line open and delegate the gate portion to Michael and Karen while he joined the call. A few words later, the call expanded into a neat stack of rectangles on his screen, and the audio changed in the way a room changes when a door opens into a hallway full of suits. A man's voice, polite, resonant, and polished, identified himself as Elliot Whitman. He requested that the board take up, as a matter of urgent concern, whether the chief executive had overreached by pausing gate operations, thereby creating cost and reputational risk. He proposed a motion that the board consider a vote of no confidence if the situation was not resolved within a short window. In another rectangle, the board chair asked for calm and for facts. The chair's voice bore the fatigue that comes from counting the cost of haste. Samuel did not posture. He described the facts as he understood them. A purchase recorded at a higher cabin, boarding passes printed below that cabin at check-in, a secondary screening that raised questions of fairness in selection, a restaurant refusal that had resulted in a voucher offered by a server whose name and shift had been recorded, and a gate classification that did not match either the purchase or the promise to handle the matter at the gate. He said he had paused boarding only at one location for one cycle, to ensure that the company did not compound an error by pretending it belonged to someone else down the line. He said he would accept scrutiny for the decision. He asked in return that scrutiny be applied to the pattern itself. He spoke like a person who believed that clarity is cheaper than spin, even on a holiday. Elliot's voice returned, smoother, making its argument through costs. He said that halting even one gate during a peak period could echo across an afternoon, and that reputational risk multiplied when the company acknowledged fault in public. He suggested the problem was a single incident that belonged in a complaint file, not in an operational log. He proposed that the chief executive's choice had widened the story rather than fixed it. He used the word optics, which is a word that can overshadow the word ethics if a room is not careful. Samuel said he welcomed cost talk and had lived his professional life inside spreadsheets. He said the cost he wanted calculated was the one that comes due when patterns are ignored until they harden into practice. He asked for the company's legal counsel to join for a brief advisory on risk. And he asked that the head of information systems, Arjun Patel, be brought into the call for one reason: to confirm whether the system logs for this station, for this morning, were intact, were preserved, and could be correlated with customer service records and point-of-sale data from the restaurant. He did not accuse anyone. He simply asked that the value of facts be restored to its original price. While the rectangles arranged themselves and new names appeared, Michael remained on the gate line with Karen and Janet, steadying the local conversation. He told them, in sentences designed to keep a ticklish situation from laughing at itself, to continue boarding where scans were clear and to leave the sisters' record visible for resolution. He asked Peter to check again for a manual override. And then he asked whether an equivalent pair of first-class seats existed on the next departure that afternoon that could be blocked now rather than promised later. He asked that the promise be typed into the record while the day still had witnesses. Maya listened to the tone, how adults can teach a system to speak like one. Back on the board call, the company's counsel confirmed that deleting or altering logs would be indefensible and that any appearance of selective scrutiny would invite a kind of audience the company did not want. Elliot pivoted. He recommended that the board still consider whether the chief executive's method, speakerphone at a gate, operational pause, had been proportionate. The chair asked for data, not mood. Samuel said that in the absence of data, he was making a process call to keep one small square of the operation still long enough to check the map and not drive into the same ditch twice. He then asked Arjun, who had joined quietly, whether the logs were intact. Arjun's voice was the voice of a careful engineer. He said he had secured the relevant logs and had begun a basic cross-reference against complaint tags and staffing rosters for the same period, and that preliminary signals suggested a skew that warranted a fuller look. He said he would need an hour to produce a chart simple enough for the board to understand at a glance, and serious enough for counsel to respect. Elliot asked whether the data collection itself introduced privacy concerns that should delay any review. He used the word prudent, which is a word that often tries to stand where brave ought to stand. Samuel kept both channels alive, the gate and the board, like a conductor listening to two orchestras warming up in adjacent rooms. He thanked Arjun and asked him, in plain words, to treat preservation as the first priority, presentation as the second. He told Michael and Karen, out loud, that the pause at the gate could now narrow even further. Boarding could continue for the next group, and the sisters would either be manually cleared into their purchased cabin or protected on the next departure with a written apology and a confirmation sent to their email before the current plane left the stand. He asked Janet to make sure that whichever outcome occurred was spoken clearly and respectfully at the podium and recorded in the reservation history with names attached. He said to the board that he would accept review of his conduct and would, if necessary, stand in front of employees to explain why he had chosen a small, visible pause rather than a large, invisible one. The room inside the rectangles went quiet long enough for a decision to ripen. Somewhere near the gate, the coffee smell drifted in again like a reminder that the ordinary still persists. The public address system announced a new set of boarding groups in the same measured tone it always uses. A child's laugh skipped once across the carpet, then settled. Maya rested the edge of the notebook against her leg to keep her hand from trembling with adrenaline that had nowhere to go. Ava stood with her shoulders set in a line that meant calm had not been a costume on her. It had been a choice. The board chair asked whether any member objected to allowing Arjun to proceed with preservation and preliminary analysis. Elliot objected, citing the need to limit exposure and to manage the narrative. The chair said narratives behave better when they are told the truth. Arjun's line clicked once, the sound a small assurance that someone was already at work. Samuel's phone, cast on his screen, flashed a new message in the corner. It was not loud. It did not glow any brighter than the rest. It simply waited for eyes. He opened it and let his voice carry what it said back into the gate area and the board call at once. Arjun, data is ready. Cannot be deleted, already sealed. Elliot frowns, requests, suspend review of the data due to privacy. The file opened like a map that finally showed where the road had been wrong. Lines of time in words, station tags, staffing blocks, and notes of interactions lined up with the steadiness of ledger entries. Arjun's voice did not rush. He described what the preserved logs showed without decoration. The rate of so-called random screenings clustering at specific lanes during specific shifts. Repeat phrases in free text fields about hair checks and attitude noted. Downgrade events rising in the same windows where a certain set of staff rotated through. Complaint tags higher than the station's own seasonal baseline. He explained for the sake of plain understanding that none of it proved intent by itself. It proved pattern. He said the logs were sealed and that copies were time-stamped in the system with a preservation notice filed to legal. He added gently that some patterns become practice when no one names them. The board rectangles settled into listening. Counsel joined with the careful timbre of a person who measures risk in cause and effect, not volume. Counsel confirmed that the sealed logs were discoverable if litigation ever arose, and that any deletion or delay framed as privacy would be indefensible. Elliot asked if a pause for a privacy review might be prudent anyway. Arjun answered by separating what could be shared publicly from what could be shared internally. Raw data stayed protected. Aggregated signals were appropriate to review at once. He described 3 signals in words anyone could hear. First, so-called random selections were happening at rates that were not random across lanes and shifts. Second, downgrade incidents concentrated in a pattern that matched those same time blocks. Third, complaint frequency and escalation time skewed against certain passengers, including those whose hair and protective styles had triggered extra checks. He spoke with the patience of a teacher who wants the class to keep up. Samuel let the gate hear enough to know that the matter had graduated beyond a single desk. He said, in a tone that refused drama, that the remedy would have 2 parts: immediate repair for the 2 travelers present, and structural repair so that no one else would ride the same wheel. For the immediate repair, he asked Michael and Karen whether 2 first-class seats could be protected on the next departure that afternoon, with a written apology and confirmation delivered before the current aircraft left the stand. Michael checked, spoke to inventory, and returned with a yes that sounded like a hand smoothing a tablecloth. For the structural repair, Samuel outlined what he called a fairness plan in plain terms: independent oversight to audit selections and seating decisions, required training with refreshers for all customer-facing staff, and a simple index that tied a portion of management bonuses to measured improvements in complaint rates and resolution times. He explained each without slang. Independent oversight meant a third party with access to sealed logs and authority to publish periodic summaries. Training meant specific scenarios and role play, not a slide deck. An index meant a number you could point to and a paycheck that moved with it. Elliot argued the cost of delay and the danger of visible fault. He used the word optics. The chair asked for the cost of repeating the same day without repair. Counsel said that cost often arrives with interest. An older director, who had not spoken until then, said he had raised children and had learned that a quiet apology right away was cheaper than a loud one later. In the corner of the screen, Arjun asked permission to share a chart. He did not show numbers, he showed shapes. 3 lines walked side by side during ordinary time, then one line jumped when certain shifts took certain lanes. He explained the axes in words, then waited. Silence is a currency in boardrooms. He let it spend itself. At the gate, the air thinned with attention. Janet continued boarding those whose scans were clear and kept her voice courteous. Peter watched the screen as if it might decide to be kind. The officers shifted their weight to keep the lane open without turning the space into a standoff. A flight attendant at the door offered help to an elderly couple with a softness that clothed the entire threshold in decency. Maya stood with the notebook in her palm like a small lantern. Ava held on to steady breathing because winter teaches people how to hold warmth inside. Samuel proposed that the board vote on 3 motions: authorize preservation and aggregated analysis under Council's eye, approve independent oversight with a public report schedule, and approve the fairness index tied to compensation. He said he would stand in front of employees to explain why data and accountability belonged in the same sentence as dignity. The chair called the question, not with theatre, but with the tone of a person who counts to keep order. Hands did not rise, voices said "I" in sequence. A single dissent registered, then fell alone. The motions carried. The room inside the rectangles felt lighter without being light. Like a hallway after a picture is hung straight. Samuel thanked the board, thanked counsel, thanked Arjun, and returned his full attention to the gate. Here is the immediate remedy, he said for the record. The Brooks reservation will be honoured in the purchased cabin on the next departure this afternoon. Before this aircraft pushes back, they will receive a written apology that acknowledges the specific error and the corrective action taken. Their record will reflect what occurred today with names and times in words. He asked Janet to speak that remedy out loud at the podium and to include a note that passenger relations would follow up with a call and a letter. Janet did as asked. She used the right names. She said the words apology and correction in the same sentence, which is where those words work best. Some passengers looked over and smiled without intrusion. The man in the flannel shirt gave a small thumbs-in-pockets nod that meant decent. The grandmotherly witness from the screening lane appeared at the edge of the crowd and made eye contact with Maya, who returned it with a grateful incline of her head. Derek and Ralph, whose job was to be a calm presence around friction, relaxed a fraction. Karen made a notation and looked like a person who can carry 2 truths at once: that the day had schedules to keep and that people had rights to respect. The current flight boarded to completion. The jet bridge pulled away like a sleeve sliding off an arm. Ava watched the airplane roll back with a sensation she did not have a proper word for: relief, braided with restlessness. The inbox chimed on Maya's phone. The message from the company arrived with simple sentences and no gloss. A written apology for the downgrade and the delayed boarding, a confirmation for seats in the purchased cabin on the later departure, and a promise of a call from passenger relations. It did not try to make the morning pretty. It tried to make it right. Samuel stayed on the line long enough to make sure the promise had a confirmation number and that the confirmation had been read back. Then he told his daughter and niece, without public affection but with a warmth that reached anyway, that he would see them at the other end. He did not tell them he was proud. He told them he was grateful for their calm. When the call ended, the space felt less like a stage and more like a room where ordinary people had done their work under bright lights. The hours between flights became a quiet intermission. Ava and Maya walked the concourse to clear the adrenaline that had nowhere to go. They bought tea. They sent a note to a commendation address with Isabel's name and shift and the words, "Thank you for seeing us." They sent a second note to the complaint channel that summarized the day in a page short enough to read and long enough to matter, with times in words and names spelled correctly. They did not visit the restaurant again. They did not need to practice forgiveness to know that a single person's grace can hold a day together. When it was time to board the later flight, the podium agent greeted them without drama, scanned the passes, and handed back 2 small slips that confirmed their seats in the cabin they had purchased. They turned down the aisle and placed their bags overhead, then sat in chairs that matched the diagram they had seen months earlier when planning the trip. A flight attendant offered a welcome that sounded like a welcome and asked if they wanted water, tea, or coffee. They chose tea. The plane lifted through a sky the color of tin and then leveled into blue. For a long minute, neither of them spoke. It felt like the first complete breath of the day. Life moves on. Policy, if left alone, often stays put. But a day like that one can lodge in the gears and make a company admit what it did not want to look at. The oversight agreement was signed. Training rolled out with live practice, not just slides. The fairness index took root, and managers began to watch their own numbers with the same attention they once reserved for on-time departures. Over winter, complaint rates at the station bent downward. Resolution times bent downward too. The public report used words, not decimals, and included short paragraphs that thanked the passengers whose patience had been asked and whose patience had run out. 6 months later, the concourse held the same winter light even though the calendar had moved. A small snow flurry stitched the windows with white thread. Ava and Maya approached Gate K-12 on another trip with the easy caution of people who know how the airport can tilt. The podium was staffed by a young woman whose name tag read Grace Nguyen. She looked up with a real smile that arrived all the way in her eyes. She did not know the history of the 2 travelers in front of her. She knew the shape of the new script, and she knew how to speak without sounding scripted. She checked the reservation, met each of their eyes, and said, "Welcome back." Behind her, a supervisor in a navy blazer coached a new hire on an art that no policy can turn into a checkbox. How to apologize in a way that repairs dignity instead of merely acknowledging inconvenience. The later that week report would show the station's complaint rate had fallen by about 1/3 since autumn, and that average response time had been cut nearly in half. The words in the report would be ordinary, clear, short, useful. But in the gate area, inside the 1,000 tiny acts that make a public square feel either kind or cold, the change felt like the difference between being seen and being tolerated. When a parent wrestled a stroller through a crowd, 3 people helped. When a boarding pass printed wrong for a traveller across the concourse, the agent said, "That is our error. Let me fix it now," which is a sentence that repairs more than it costs. And when a server on a later day offered a voucher with a handwritten apology, a manager praised the judgment rather than scolding the deviation. Ava and Maya stood at the counter and accepted their passes. The paper was the same as always, warm from the printer. The words printed on it were the difference. They were not a favor, not an exception, not a correction written after the fact. They were what had been promised. The sisters took 2 steps back and looked at the floor, the ceiling, the people in between, and felt the small lift a day can have when the rules and the people who apply them share one language. 6 months later, snow drifted thin beside K-12. Grace Nguyen smiled to welcome Ava and Maya. "Welcome, first class." In a quiet corner, Janet coached a new hire on how to offer a proper apology. Winter's light rested on gate K-12 as the plane edged away, and 2 sisters felt a breath finally arrive. Nearby, a supervisor taught a new hire how to let an apology mend dignity, not just delay. What began as small frictions, an errant print line, a needless inspection, a closed smile, ended with truth spoken plainly, records preserved, and a company choosing repair over hurry. The lesson is simple and old. Love widens fairness. And honest contrition is a kind of redemption that lets strangers build a warmer home together, on streets, in shops, and yes, among departure boards and rolling bags. Like a lamp kept in a window on a snowed-in night, one steady act of kindness can guide heavy systems, and one faithful record of the truth can keep them from losing the road again. Perhaps let this story echo through ordinary days. Pause before judgment, learn a name, thank the quiet helpers, stand near the person who is being pressed to the edge. If this story has warmed a corner of the heart, consider passing that warmth along to the neighbor in line, the worker under bright lights, so that wherever people gather, the welcome feels a little more like home.